great to have you here. So back today with another horror movie review. This one is The Strangers Chapter 1. So if I'm being honest, this movie was a little bit rough to get through. I know this one came out earlier this year. I've seen a few things and heard a few pieces of feedback on people's opinions of this not being great, and I never wound up seeing it. Just watched it for the first time, so this is a one-time view review. And this may be the one time I watched this movie, because if I'm being honest, I was not a big fan of this one. So The Strangers is a movie series that I have not necessarily been a big fan of historically. The previous Strangers movie, which this one follows a similar pattern to, came out I think late 2000s. I think it was like 2008 or so. And that movie was okay. I felt like it wasn't necessarily my favorite type of movie as far as horror goes, but it did some things relatively well and was an okay movie in its own right. This one, however, I feel like does not meet up to those standards that the 2008 one had. I feel like this one either copied many things or did a lot of things worse, in my opinion. I don't know what the long-term intent here was with The Strangers Chapter 1. I thought I remember hearing they were planning to do a few movies here, but with how the first one did, probably in the box office, I'm not sure this one will have a longevity as far as a franchise goes. But we'll have to see if that winds up being the case or not. But either way, the story of this one, if you're not familiar with the Stranger story, it's pretty much two people that are out on their own. And specifically in this instance, we have Maya and Ryan, and they are traveling. I think it's up in Oregon. And I think Maya has a job that she's looking to get, and she's like going there for an interview or something along those lines. So they're traveling there. They stop at a pit stop and they get some food at a diner. Sure enough, they come outside and they find out their car has some issues, and there's a mechanic there, and Ryan's a little quick to catch on. It's like, hey, there's a guy that does cars that happens to be at the place where my car died. That seems a little suspicious. So he thinks something's up, which probably good reason to think that. But either way, they keep the car there, and they hear that there's an Airbnb that they can stay at relatively locally. So they go up to there and stay there for a little bit of time, like a few hours or so. And then Ryan's like, where's my inhaler? I think it's in the car. So he takes a motorcycle, which they just happen to have, I guess, the keys for there, that's at the house, back down to where his car was left off to go get the inhaler from the car. Meanwhile, Maya's at home, and this movie really does a poor job, I feel like, of keeping your attention. I feel like there's frequently, throughout the entire movie, this movie I feel like drags on way too long. The plot itself isn't that something that needs a really drawn out story to it, but sure enough, I don't know how long this thing is, but I feel like it's way longer than it needs to be. They could cut out 20, 25, maybe even 30 minutes of this movie, and it would be fine as a movie. There's so much just dead air where there's an intent to have suspense build, like there's that eerie music build up, then you see somebody with a mask like in the background and nothing happens. Then we do it again later and something happens the second time. So there's just frequently a lot of just dead air where they're trying to build suspense, but you're just sitting there like, okay, let's get to the point. At least that's how I was. They also have, in the typical Strangers fashion, somebody knocking at the door, and she's asking for somebody that's in the house that's not actually there. And they keep saying, they're not here, please go away. And eventually, here's where I feel like the characters were a little bit weaker too, surprisingly, for this movie. You have Ryan's a bit of an uncertain as far as how his character development goes. There's one moment where he's like running outside, chasing at this girl, telling her to get out of there. There's another moment where he's just panicking in a corner. So I feel like the bravery and the reaction of Ryan is somewhat all over the place. Maybe that's realistic, somebody would do that, but he goes from being like mega hero to mega afraid and just bounces a little bit too much to make sense as a specific character. Maya's fine, I guess. She's just frequently afraid. There's a few parts where I feel like she makes dumb decisions, like she gets grabbed through a window at one point and then doesn't mention that she saw the girl with the other mask right in front of her to Ryan. She just moves on as if that person wasn't there. So a lot of parts I feel like with the characters, I feel like they didn't make the best decisions and they don't necessarily make sense as characters as far as how they act throughout the entire movie, I would say. Maya gets kind of spooked a little bit throughout her time when Ryan's away. He goes down to get his inhaler. He runs into the person there who's watching the car and he's like, hey, I could have shot you. I didn't know you were coming. Winds up getting his inhaler, goes back, he grabs some food along the way, and there's just people there eating that are locals, and they're just like heckling him a little bit, like, hey, come hang out with us. And I don't know really what their deal is supposed to be. Maybe you're not supposed to know. They're just kind of strange folks. He gets food, brings it back, and Maya mentions she's seen somebody, and he's like, oh, you probably saw this. And then they wind up hearing noises, and that's when he starts getting a little bit braver. And then when they actually break in, he kind of backs off, and they sneak through. There's a spot where like Maya gets something jabbed through her hand, and she has to be quiet, and then she's like yelling, but trying to stay quiet. The strangers are just kind of oblivious, but they're also like right there in front of the people. I think they're just doing the play with their food type behavior when it comes to who the strangers are and how they're acting, which makes sense. They're just kind of crazy individuals, and they're just doing what they please. So their character behavior makes sense because they're not supposed to make sense. So if that makes sense. But yeah, overall, and I feel like there's some changes they do here that don't make the movie better. I feel like it makes it worse. Maybe it makes sense in the progression of the movie, but in the original Strangers in 2008 that I had seen, they have a friend come visit them, and the male character accidentally shoots him and kills his friend, which is a traumatizing experience because he thought this is one of the strangers in the house and I need to take him out. In this situation, we have a similar setup, except Ryan shoots the Airbnb owner, which he doesn't have a relationship to, so we don't really care. He kind of just becomes a casualty in the situation. He really just becomes a line later on, even when Ryan's like pointing a gun at one of the people in the mask. He's like, you're reluctant with your first kill. He's like, good thing this is my second, or something like that. That's like, okay, buddy, calm down. You're not just like Rambo all of a sudden. That just kind of adds to his back and forth with being like, who are you? Are you a tough guy? Are you gonna cower away? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They wind up getting captured in the end, as you expect. The movie lets you know that pretty much right away that they're going to be dead at the end because A, that's the point of if you've seen these movies in the past, but B, like the title card talks about, hey, there's this many murders per year, and this is one of the most gruesome ones. So I feel like it just right away lets you know, okay, these characters aren't going to live. So if you don't even know the story, there's no really surprise when they happen. We get to the end, they do the same thing with when they're captured. They're like, why are you doing this to us? Because you're here. So it's not like, hey, this is a targeted attack. It's just, we're just psychos and you were in the house, so we were going to have fun with you specifically. So I get that's the point of like, oh, they're crazy. You don't know what they're going to do, but I don't know. I don't know who this movie was for. I don't know why we needed to remake this other than putting something out in theaters, because the original, well, not for me, was fine. This one I feel like is much worse than the original one. And yeah, there's just not much, I feel like, to this movie. This is one that I personally would say you could skip. I mean, if you want to watch it on streaming, that's fine, but I don't plan to watch it again. If it's on, maybe I would keep it on, but we get to some of those scenes where it's really dragging out. I'm like, okay, let me move on. So not a big recommendation for me. They also have an ending where it's kind of a mid and end credit situation where the girl Maya, she survives. She's in a hospital. Then you see the scene of like one of the guys in the masks in the hospital with her. I don't know if we're supposed to say that these are like demonic or like spiritual or like supernatural killers, because there's a scene, and maybe you want to say that wasn't real. I was in the shower at one point, and you see one of the guys just standing right there. She should have seen that guy, no matter how bad her peripheral vision would be, or like just sensing that. I know she was like, her eyes were closed or whatever, but he's there. And then we like move the camera back to where he's a little bit behind her, and then he just vanishes. So that didn't make sense. Like, these are supposed to be people that are just killing these individuals. Are we giving them supernatural powers where they can do like Jason Voorhees and just like bounce around the entire woods? I don't know, but that scene didn't make sense. So I'm not sure what they were going for there. Then obviously he's in the hospital at the end. Like, there's nobody watching the hospital. Like, I don't know. My opinion, this movie's not for me. Maybe, hopefully you enjoyed it. I know that, as I said, this one came out earlier this year, so maybe you saw it in theaters, but we'll love to hear your feedback on The Strangers, Chapter 1, the franchise as a whole, maybe a potential next movie. I don't know. I haven't checked to see how this one performed and if that impacts any future movies, but in my viewpoint, I could see this one being a one and done based off of my perception of how it was. So as far as score for this one, I don't want to be too harsh, but I kind of do want to be, because this is one I'm not sure I would watch again. If somebody wants to watch it, okay, but it doesn't do anything well, and there's nothing really great. The acting's meh, the characters are meh, the story is a story that's been done before. It's a redone story, but it's done worse. So there's not a really whole lot of things that I could say. I mean, the cinematography was fine, I guess. But honestly, I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 10. I know that's a pretty rough score, but it just feels like there was no originality here. And on top of that, they don't do anything really exceptional. So they don't really take any risk. The changes they make are worse. And beyond that, it's just a recycled idea. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it a little bit more than I did. I personally, honestly, I would love to hear if someone else really liked it. I know probably you feel like, oh, he doesn't like this movie, so let me just not give my opinion. I would be pumped to see if somebody's like, yeah, I love this. This is 10 out of 10. Because I want to have people enjoy the movie. So as I said, this one is just not for me and not one that I would personally recommend. So what are your thoughts? We'd love to see that in the feedback down below. Either way, appreciate you so much for watching and hope to talk to you again soon.